Our second expert speaker says that the build versus buy approach in software development is overly simplistic. It often creates a false perception of the road ahead. Only build if you have to, and you have to. So choose what you need to build. Hi, Simon. Hope you're already here. Please take the floor.
Yep. Hi. Thanks, Victor. And it was really great. I just wanted um, to thank Edward for saying give people 10% of their time to do something new, because I think that's a tremendous way to get a team both um, invigorated around their current work and moving into some change. So I just love that. I love that comment. So that was a great takeaway for me. So what I want to talk about today is I'll just briefly introduce myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about this kind of build versus buy decision. And we've been having this build versus buy discussion. I think everybody has it in every organization, and boards want to hear, well, why would you build? Why would you buy? Those kinds of things. And we talk about it so much that I think it has become overly simplistic. And I'll go through why that is and talk a bit about when you would buy, when you would build, and what it really means to do both. So a bit about me and my firm is, so I'm with a firm called Ironwood Health. I'm a principal at Ironwood Health. We are a group of folks who has been there and done that. All of us have C-suite experience in our backgrounds. I've been a CIO. I've been a chief product officer. I've been a VP of health information technology for a very large health plan. I've implemented the websites and e-business for another very large health plan. So have been through this this discussion more than a few times with more than a few executives, more than a few clients. So wanted to jump in and talk about where we are. And I will start with this. So as a CIO, and I'm going to kind of take the CIO hat on this one, is a lot of times it starts one of two ways. One of them is, the business leader comes to you and says, so I was at a conference, and as a CIO, your immediate kind of want to put your head in your hands and go, oh no. We were at a conference. We saw this great new software. The vendor said it's going to fix all our problems with XYZ. And it's really easy to turn on, and it barely needs IT. And those of you who are in the technology world, or the CIOs sitting on this call, you've heard this more than once, and your response, I think, is, oh, really? And then conversely, we often hear, so we have this idea for some software that will fix our problems with everything in the world, anything in the world. And we think we should build it because, and there's a ton of different reasons people will come up with to build stuff. And some of them are very valid, some of them are not so valid. But this is a place that it often starts. And really, I tend to, in both of those scenarios, think, oh boy. And it starts as a somewhat innocent, somewhat seemingly simplistic beginning. And really, this build versus buy, it's not that simple, and it's overly simplistic. And what Victor said was, it creates a false perception of the road ahead. And the reason it creates a false perception of the road ahead is because nothing happens in isolation. Even something as seemingly simplistic as somebody saying, I want a Smartsheets account to do project management. If you are the CIO, CISO, then you think, well, yeah, but what about somebody putting corporate confidential information into that Smartsheet about when we're going to launch a project? Do I want that just out there on somebody's desktop that they're billing to their corporate credit card? So even something that may seemingly be as simplistic as that, or as innocuous as that, can become very, very complex very quickly. So what are the considerations we are thinking about when we think about build versus buy, and where do we want to get to, which is generating the most enterprise value we can for the company? So we're looking first at the ecosystem and the environment. So what is your own internal ecosystem in your company? Because what you're doing needs to fit within what you have today, or with what you're building, ideally both. And then what is the overall environment? Because you're not standalone. You are looking at how does your company fit within the larger environment? So when we start thinking about um, putting something in, there's a knock-on effect to getting data in and out of the company, in and out of other systems. So there's that is a clear consideration. The roadmap to a successful implementation. People often minimize this and think, well, and I don't know how many people are on the call, and if I could see you all, I would sure, when I say this, I'd see a lot of heads nodding, which is, oh, it's only going to take us 6 months to turn this on. No. There's a lot of work that goes into either a build or a buy here, and there's a lot of remarkably similar work. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then another key consideration is, what are your internal capabilities and commitment? Because they're very different to commit to buying something and using it versus building something and maintaining it. So we'll talk a bit about there. I'm going to touch upon everyone's favorite topic here, intellectual property. And then I'll talk a little bit about the cost to implement and maintain. So when we're talking about a build versus buy decision and trying to look at this holistically, it is much more complex than a lot of people would immediately think of. So just a really quick view of the healthcare ecosystem, and this is grossly simplified. So when we look at this, it's probably hard to see, but you've got your patient, you've got your provider world, you've got your payer world, you've got interfaces between all of these things happening. And then within these bubbles, you've got your interfaces between systems. You've got your interfaces with the databases. You've got your services buses that you may or may not have intelligence within them. You've got portals. You've got mobile apps. You've got stuff that people don't tend to think about, which is you've got your HRIS systems. You've got your CRM systems. You've got your call center systems stuff. You've got your, all of that stuff that you have to figure out how this is going to fit within. That said, I generally start with a principle which says only build if you have to, and you have to. So really choose what you need to build. And what I mean by that is, with very, very rare exceptions, maybe that Smartsheet example to use, do project management, you need to build something. Because if you want whatever you're buying, if you go down the buy road, you are going to have to integrate that into your ecosystem, your environment, both in your own ecosystem and with the overall environment, because you're going to need data to come into it. You're going to need people to interact with it, that you're going to need IT security around it. You're going to need it to connect to other systems, et cetera. And no matter what any vendor tells you out there, there is almost no plugin that works immediately out of the box to integrate something into your environment or with another system. In fact, I would challenge anybody to tell me there's a plugin that works with your overall ecosystem. And even with the plugins that say this software will work with this software with a plugin, there's usually a lot of caveats, which are, yes, if the versions are this, yes, if you didn't make any changes to the underlying software, yes, if you didn't change any data structures, et cetera. So when I say only build if you have to, and you have to, so you got to choose what you want to build. Really, you need to choose where are you going to put your development resources and your build resources. What do you have your capability and capacity to do there? So it becomes a very, you're putting something into a non-simple machine a lot of times. So that's a consideration with build versus buy. Another kind of consideration here is a successful roadmap to implement something. And people tend to think, well, when I'm turning software on, I'm just turning software on. Well, no. If you do it well, and I'm going to back up here a second. So I think many people on this would also nod their heads if I said, how many times have you heard that we're going to put this software in and it's going to transform stuff, and then it really fell flat, didn't deliver the value? And it's unfortunately fairly common. And I would argue most of the time the reason that stuff falls flat is because you didn't do the work up front around this. So the business architecture to say, what are your objectives with this? What are the requirements? What do we need to change in workflows and rules and roles and how the system works? How do we do the analytics and reporting? I'm a huge fan of defining the MVP before the vendor lands on the ground, because if you buy something and you go to implement it, when the vendor lands, and this is not meant to be a knock on any vendors, they are going to want to get their software turned on in a way that they're familiar with as quickly as they can, because they start getting paid. That's the nature of the business, and that's also human nature to do that. So they're going to want to do that. If you want the product to get turned on the way that you want it to get turned on, you need to define what you need when it's turned on. So that's really important, and that's where people in the build world, you do this naturally. You have to do it, right? You may do it well, you may not do it not as well, but you have to do this. And where I think that people kind of miss sometimes is, if they're in the buy world, they sometimes miss on doing this. They don't do it up front because they're like, well, we're going to buy the software. The vendor knows how to do it. They'll help us kind of figure this all out. I would argue that this is one of, if not the most important things that you can do. And you'll see from where I put my Harvey balls on how important it is, or how much you need to do, the importance I put on this in both the build and the buy world. So, you get a few breaks when you're doing the buy, because a vendor has a package of software. You can only do so much with requirements, only do so much with workflow and kind of analytics and those things. The technical architecture, this is where it diverges a bit more, because the buy has a more defined technical architecture. The build, you have to do it yourself. The place that I would suggest you need to pay a lot of attention is around the data architectures, no matter what. And then obviously the integrations are huge here. Systems architecture, complete divergence. But then again, you come back to, so there's technical architecture, technical kind of build pieces are different. But when you look at the implementation, and you look at things like project management, change management, leadership, all of those things are equally important in a build and a buy. So this is where some of that, when I say that it creates a false perception of the road ahead with the buy of a software, is, yes, you can do it quick and maybe not as well if you don't do all this stuff. But if you want it really implemented well and done well, you're going to do these things, which are a lot of the build discipline as well. So those are some things to consider as you go through this, your decisioning process. Okay, so you say, well, I'm going to buy, but you said buy, and then you're saying you still need to build. And I think I touched upon this a little bit, but you're inserting into the ecosystem. So you've got integrations, data migrations, movement and governance, infrastructure, network connectivity, authentication, Active Directory, and then everyone's favorite, IT security, which you've got to pay attention to. So this is why I say you still have to build. So you're going to be building no matter what. So choose what you're going to build. So these are the components within that. So then you say, okay, well, so Simon, if you say I got to do all this stuff anyway, why not just build? And here's where I think the conversation gets a little more tricky. And it's because if you choose to build, you are now a software development company, whether you like it or not, and you likely have only one customer. So what does that mean? That means you have an elevated level of internal capabilities needed and commitment. And I will stress this commitment significantly, because I get to work with a lot of clients across a lot of different companies, and they have internal software a lot of times. And I talk to them about the commitment, because they say, well, we're thinking about maybe going and replacing this with something off the shelf that we buy. And so I say, okay, that may be the right decision for you or may not be the right decision. Let's talk about what your commitment is if you keep building this software out, because you are now a software development company that has to continue to provide releases, additional functionality support for your own folks. You have to continue to maintain currency with versions of other software in both your internal ecosystem and the overall environment. So let's just say you have a piece of software that integrates with data coming from EMRs. You are going to be continually keeping up with all the updates on all the different formats, all the different data that's coming, additional things that folks want. So this ongoing maintenance is going to be significant for you if you're going to build. So that I'm being really clear. I'm not biasing either to build or buy. I'm saying these are the considerations to make the correct decision within your organization. So these are the things you have to know. So are we going to also maintain internal teams with those skill sets? And as we heard earlier, give them the opportunity to learn and develop and grow and be able to innovate and work with other systems. Are you willing to make that commitment to do this? Because if you're not willing to make that commitment, you're going to get a product that's going to get worse and worse and worse over time, that because you haven't committed to keeping it current and expanding the use cases for your users. So that's one of the reasons you might choose, all else being equal, to buy versus build. Now, if we go, so when should I build it all? I think there's some really compelling things here. And when I say only build if you have to, and you have to, this is where I say, and I will make, and I have made the arguments to boards that I want to build something instead of buying something, is there's simply not a product in the marketplace that'll meet your needs. You may be operating in a niche industry that there's just nothing out there that you can either make fit or easily fit to what it is. So you're going to do something that you want to, you have to do something. You're forced into it. The second one is where I said I'm going to touch on intellectual property. People like to use the term intellectual property to mean a lot of things. And I'm talking about everybody across vendors, across organizations, love to say, well, we have IP. So you'll notice my underlined word here is defensible intellectual property. That's where I say is, if this is defensible in the marketplace, then yes, we can have a conversation around intellectual property. But if you try to tell me that you have intellectual property in some generalizable workflow that 7 other people are doing, it's not defensible. It's not truly IP. But if you truly have defensible IP and you cannot abstract it by putting it into a smart service or by using it in a kind of a sidecar, technical sidecar for something, then yes, you're in a situation where you should build something because that's the way to protect it. And you can get into conversations around patent law and et cetera, and how that works or doesn't work in technology, but I'm going to leave it at that. Another great reason to build something is it will increase your enterprise value within your investment or business model. So if you are on a journey where you are funded from VC, you're moving to private equity or trying to go public, and this will increase your enterprise value to have something that you built versus something that you have bought, and it's real and your board agrees with you and your CFO agrees with you, then yes, this is another really compelling reason to go and build something versus buy something. Another one that we're running into, is vendor contractual terms in the space are unacceptable. I mean, there are vendors out there that have positions in the marketplace, leading positions, stuff that feels monopolistic positions, and they have contractual terms that you just are unacceptable to you. They don't allow you to work with other vendors that too closely related to their space. The contract terms, whether they're financial or the length of term that you need, don't work for you. Their licensing model doesn't work for you. There's just going to be situations where you run into that the vendor terms are unacceptable to your organization to be able to sign. And that does happen sometimes. And in that case, then you're going to lean towards a build versus a buy. And then another one is you will offer this product to external customers. So if you're going to resell it and you will really do that, it's not a pie in the sky idea that 17 years and 2 days from now we might offer this in the marketplace. No, if you have a concrete roadmap idea that you're going to offer this product to external customers, then yes, that's another reason that I would say you should go and build it all. I have a note down here that says cost to implement and maintain is rarely cheaper to build. I've heard the argument that it's going to be cheaper to build this a lot of times, and that really you need to work through what is the total cost of ownership in both of them, because frequently it's closer to even than people think. There are scenarios in which scale becomes important here, that you may be able to build something that for a large user base that you're going to use internally, and it's just an unacceptable contract price to buy it. There may be scenarios in which if you're small, it's just much easier to buy something than build something too. So really take a look at this, because there is not a one size fits all. It's cheaper to build something or it's cheaper to buy something. I think that that was it. I hope I stayed on fairly good time, Victor, but certainly if folks have questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Well, yeah, yeah. To be honest, I'm really amazed by the final note when you said that the cost of buying and maintaining a ready-made solution is quite often about the same with the building one and maintaining one. That's an
Yeah.
eye opener. That's really a big insight, I guess, for most of the listeners as well, because sometimes, not sometimes, in most cases, we consider building a solution that is customized, that is specified for our unique business processes, as something that is so cost taking, so cost blowing, I would say, that most prefer buying a solution, not considering the fact that strategically you will be paying so much money as well. And thank you so much. Aside of it,
So
there's so much. Yeah,
Victor, I'll go back to when I said there's all of the work that you have to do to successfully implement a purchased solution. People typically don't count that as part of the costs. So, like all that upfront work to implement something successfully, all the business architecture, all of those components, when you're starting to look at the cost considerations, and software is not cheap to license, software is not cheap to buy. It's always more expensive than you think it is. So, it really is situation by situation, and there's no one size fits all answer there.
totally agree. No silver bullets as usual, unfortunately, but still no silver bullets. Yeah, and we actually have questions for you already. Let me
Okay.
just open the chat section. Uh, can you share more examples of successful implementation of in-house solutions or all of off-the-shelf products in healthcare IT? And what were the critical success factors in each case?
So I think I'll start with the critical success factors, and I'll go kind of back to how it plays out in the build versus or built, purchased or built solutions. The critical success factors to me are, what are your objectives? So before you get to requirements, whatever else, what are your objectives? What are you seeking to accomplish? And how well can you articulate those objectively? So if somebody comes and says, I want to make this better, by how much, over what period of time, those types of things, right? So I think really understanding your objectives is going to help drive you down this road. If you don't have a really concise, clear understanding of your objectives, you aren't ready to start anything, would be my argument. I think that the next thing is jumping from there to understanding what impact is this going to have both within and around your business. So when I talked about what is it going to change, so we have our objectives. What do we need to change to get to those objectives? So if you just think you can put in a different piece of technology and it's going to change everything, you are going to be disappointed 9 times out of 10. Because if you don't change the roles, you don't change the workflows, you don't change how you do your data management, you don't change your analytics and reporting, you will almost certainly be disappointed. So I would suggest that that's another really key component. So your objectives, What do you need to change to get to those objectives before you have the technology, right? This is really kind of how do you put this all together? And then to me, the other thing is that that idea of the minimum viable product. So what are you going to launch with? What do you really need to make this effective? And everything else can go in the backlog. It should be prioritized in a backlog. But what do you need to make it effective? And then once you have that set up, it's implementation, implementation, implementation discipline. So it's just a disciplined implementation. I mean, that's one of the things that working with you guys at Yalantis over the last 10 years that I've loved is because that like the structure, the implementation discipline that you bring to it is really a helpful lift. Now, whether you have if you have the skills internally, if you're going to rely upon a vendor, build versus buy, that implementation discipline is critical to keep yourself on track. So those would be the big things I would say. um, and I've been involved in implementing small apps for companies that have been very successful and made significant differences in performance. And those were things because we had a specific objective and we understood what we needed to change to get there. So we need to get this information in the hands of these people, for example. Massive difference just by having this, this real-time information made a really big difference. I've had systems that we've purchased off the shelf that we've implemented that have been pretty much bog standard off the shelf, and they met our objectives. They were able to meet our timelines. Their product off the shelf was a minimum viable product, and we managed the implementation well, and that was successful. And I've had ones that haven't gone like that, and it was because we didn't specify objectives or a minimum viable product or didn't manage it well. And we've all been there on those. So I think those would be my big takeaways.
Thank you. Thank you so much. These are really big ones. All right. We have another question. Thank you, Simon. What are the key challenges healthcare organizations face today in terms of any solution implementation? Which one's the most critical from your perspective? A tough one.
It's a can I say everything is the answer? Um, you know,
I guess so.
I'm going to say time, and I'll expand upon time a little bit. We are in healthcare in a fairly significant time of technical change right now. I've spent my entire career in healthcare over the last 30-ish years or so, I guess, and we we are in a time of probably more architectural and technology use change than I can recall. And what I mean by that is not just kind of using EMRs and stuff like that. Is actually I'm seeing healthcare catching up to some modern technology, modern architectural standards, and so there's a lot going on. And the economy is not getting fantastically better to all of a sudden, have employers want to put more time aside for you to do new and change things. So this pressure of, on one hand, of this really significant technical change happening and huge capabilities opening up. I think we've heard about AI capabilities. Computing power is much more now. We've got data moving around a bit more from EMRs and things like that. So there's a lot more possibility sitting here. But then on the other side is this huge amount of pressure to just run your business and maintain profitability. So I'm going to say the biggest thing that I think we see now is availability of time for executives to focus on stuff. And frankly, from the top of the company all the way down through the line level.
Thank you so much. Wow. We have actually so many questions to answer, but unfortunately we're pressed for time. So I would like to thank you, Simon, for the presentation, for the Q&A session, and the insights you provided. I'm definitely sure that these are eye-openers. And I guess we will be forwarding some of the questions later on, so that
Okay,
people could catch up with their questions and answers. Thank you so much again for the
that'd be great.
presentation. It was really nice.